The leaves turn gold, the weather turned cold, and the story began to unfold. It's 1976, a season still alive. The legends and the memories that time could never hide. From the kickoff in September to the champions at the end, we turn the pages back again and live those days once more, my friend.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Pigskin Glory, football 50 years ago today. Well, tonight we're wrapping up the month of July, 1976, a month that signaled football's return from a long off-season. NFL training camps opened across the country as veterans and rookies reported back to work, all chasing that same goal of earning a roster spot. We also saw the College All-Star game, where the defending Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers reminded everyone just how dominant they were before thunderstorms brought the game to an early end. North of the border, the Canadian Football League officially kicked off its regular season. Through July, we watched Ottawa jump out to an undefeated start, Montreal end a long losing streak in Saskatchewan, and several exciting finishes that reminded us football season has truly arrived. Off the field, one of the biggest stories involved the NFL's controversial television blackout policy. Rather than seeking congressional approval for changes to the law, league owners voted to continue their existing blackout rules, keeping local home games off television if they failed to sell out 72 hours in advance. It was another reminder that football wasn't just being shaped on the field, but also in the boardrooms and living rooms and courtrooms across America. And by the end of the month, the waiting was over. On July 31st, the 1976 NFL preseason kicked off with Tampa Bay and Seattle making their debuts, veterans returning to the field, and fans finally getting their first glimpse of what the upcoming season might have in store for them. So let's turn the clock back to July of 1976 one final time and relive the biggest football stories from that month. This is Pigskin Glory, football 50 years ago today. One story that seemed to follow us almost every single day during the July of 1976 was that of the future of O.J. Simpson. Every week there was another headline. Was he going to Los Angeles? Would the Rams make another offer? Was he going to retire? Was he bluffing? Every newspaper seemed to have a different answer. And by the end of July, nothing had changed. Rams owner Carroll Rosenblum clearly wanted O.J. Simpson. O.J. wanted to play on the West Coast, closer to home and closer to the growing entertainment industry, but Bills owner Ralph Wilson refused to accept what he believed was an inadequate trade package. Now, as a lifelong Bills fan, part of me wants to be selfish. You don't let the greatest player in franchise history at that time just walk away because he wants to leave. You fight to keep him. But looking back 50 years later, I think both sides were already telling us the relationship was over. And the question wasn't whether OJ would stay forever. The question was whether dragging it out for weeks helped anyone. Every day, the conversation became less about the Buffalo Bills and more about one player. Instead of focusing on training camp, a new season, and building chemistry, everyone kept asking the same question. What's going to happen to OJ? Football is the ultimate team sport. Every player has to believe everyone is pulling the same direction. When your biggest story is a contract dispute and trade rumors, that unity becomes much harder to build. In hindsight, I think the trade probably should have happened. Not because Buffalo didn't need O.J. Simpson. They absolutely did. And not because Ralph Wilson should have accepted a bad deal. It should have happened because both sides seem to want different futures. Sometimes the best move isn't the one that gets you the biggest return. Sometimes it's removing the distraction and allowing everyone else to simply move forward together. The Bills of 1976 were a franchise that desperately needed stability and solidarity. Instead, they entered the season carrying one of the biggest distractions in professional sports. And looking back 50 years later, I can't help but wonder if that lingering uncertainty hurt the team long before they ever played their first regular season game. All right, well, I've talked long enough. It's time to bring in the panel before I accidentally start doing all their jobs too. Joining me, as always, on the bottom below the screen is Charles, our baseball historian. And don't worry, he'll still find a way to sneak baseball into a football conversation. Somehow. We've also got Mark on the bottom right, who has a knack for taking us all back with another memory from 1976. If there was a transistor radio, a hot summer day, or a neighborhood football game involved, chances are Mark remembers it. And finally,
Hi.
to my right, we have Chris, our resident Bills fan from Wisconsin. If this conversation somehow circles back to Buffalo, don't be surprised. He's probably been waiting all show to circle the wagons. Gentlemen, welcome back. Let's talk about the biggest stories of July 1976. Mark, as you listen to that monologue, do you think the Bills and O.J. Simpson had reached the point where a trade was simply the best option for everyone involved? Or do you think Ralph Wilson was right to refuse to make a deal?
Now, I think a trade would have been the best for everybody, and to just cut this line of BS and poison and everything else, and just move forward, like you said. I don't think. You sometimes have to just do what's best for everyone involved, and not what's best for you. And he's I don't know how much longer he's going to have left at this point in his career, and it might be best to chalk up some younger players and think about the future.
All right, Charles, you've studied the history of professional sports. Have you seen other situations where one player's contract dispute or trade request became such a distraction that affected an entire team's play?
I've heard a player hold out before, like Kovac and Drysdale 10 years prior, holding out for about $1 million contract between the two over a 3-year period. But while they waited, Kovac and Drysdale would line up to do movies before they ultimately got 1-year deals, but not to the extent of O.J. Simpson here. Mark's right. You should probably just trade him to LA and see what you could get. On the flip side, who do you have as a quarterback backup option if O.J. is in fact out?
Good point. All right, Chris, putting on your Bills hat, your fan hat, was there a point during July of 1976 where you would have said, let's just make the trade and move on? Or would you have wanted the Bills to keep fighting to hold on to O.J.?
I think a trade would have been a huge mistake, because it's not like OJ was, talking about this last year or just a month ago. It's like it just suddenly blew up, I want to leave. But here's the thing, though. It's not like he was demanding. It wasn't a money thing. And whatever return they got, it's not like, remember, who exactly would they have got in return? I mean, Jim Braxton, God bless him, he wasn't going to be the bell cow. And, sometimes when you trade for 10 cents on the dollar, sometimes it can be a bad trade in return. I know it's not Herschel, but as Ricky Waters once famously said, for who? For what?
All right. That's an interesting spin on things, the 3 different opinions on O.J. Simpson. As we move on to August, September, October, no doubt we'll be hearing about him as the season progresses. Topic number 1 for the night is movers and shakers. July saw plenty of movement around the football world. Back to the Buffalo Bills as they traded wide receiver J.D. Hill to the Detroit Lions. The Cincinnati Bengals made several trades, including sending future Hall of Fame receiver Charlie Joyner to San Diego, a move that would become one of the biggest steals in NFL history. The New York Jets also dealt veteran wide receiver Eddie Bell to the Green Bay Packers. There were also a pair of notable retirements. Washington Redskins safety Mike Bass decided to hang up the cleats after an outstanding career, while Dallas Cowboys linebacker Dave Edwards also announced his retirement, changing the face of the NFC East. And finally, one more interesting comeback story. Jim Kick. After spending time away from the NFL, the former Miami Dolphins star returned with the Denver Broncos, hoping to prove he still had something left in the tank. There is certainly no shortage of player movements in the month of July. All right, Charles, looking back 50 years later, which move from July do you think had the biggest long-term impact on the NFL? Was it Charlie Joyner going to San Diego, or was there another move that stands out to you?
Well, it looks like Charlie Joyner, based on what I'm seeing here, is a pretty big deal, because in Joyner's first year with the Chargers, he would be in the Pro Bowl and do so again in the 79 and 80 season. And for a change, Charlie Joyner stayed healthy. I don't think he missed a game in the NFL for nearly a decade. And a sport that's physically demanding of the NFL, that's pretty good. Now, as far as J.D. Hill being traded to the Detroit Lions, I don't understand the logic here with J.D. Hill. I mean, he played every day for 4 years as a wide receiver. You don't know what you're going to get on a daily basis here, but you can count on him being in a lineup every week. Except that is on the first play of the season, he injured his knee, teared his knee to the point where he is out for the season.
Okay, the J.D. Hill trade. Now, I think this is part of why the Bills didn't want to lose it, because if you lose OJ, J.D. Hill, Ahmad Rashad, that's a disastrous offseason. And I mean, that's probably one of the reasons. As for Charlie Joyner, well, after a 2-12 season, Lord knows Dan Fouts needs some help in San Diego, considering how bad they were last year. The Bengals have Isaac Curtis. I think it's a case of dealing from a position of strength for a position of weakness, i.e. the pass rush. Eddie Bell, well, that's one less player Joe Namath's going to misfire on an interception. And as for Mike Bass, well, you mentioned the former Redskin, and of course his legacy will always be the answer to a trivia question. Who was the guy who scored the Super Bowl touchdown when Garo Yepremian made the worst throw in the history of professional sports? It was Mike Bass who scored that touchdown off that play.
All right, Chris, while we're on you, from the Bills fan perspective, you mentioned losing both J.D. Hill, Ahmad Rashad, and O.J. Simpson. Do you think it's the right move at this time, or did it leave the Bills even thinner at wide receiver, losing both Hill and Rashad?
It would have left them even thinner, because remember, last year Joe Ferguson tied for the NFL lead in touchdown passes. Losing two of your top receivers, I mean, that's not easy to replace. Like, what exactly was Ferguson going to do? I mean, you can't have, unless you think O.J. Simpson is going to be Chuck Foreman, someone has to catch the ball.
All right, Mark, we often talk about trades, but retirements can change a team just as much. Between Mike Bass and Dave Edwards stepping away, which retirement do you think left a bigger hole for his team?
I'd probably would say Mike Bass. Probably the Cowboys are still pretty well loaded on defense. The Redskins, I feel like they're an aging squad, and I think Bass is going to hurt the loss of him retiring the Redskins more than anybody from the Cowboys. The Cowboys is just next one up. I don't know who the Redskins are going to have to replace right off the top of my head.
And Dallas already has Hollywood Henderson, so they found their replacement for Edwards.
Hollywood Henderson can also return kicks, as we found out in 1975. When it comes to preseason retirements through training camp, I always feel it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you want to celebrate the end of a career, but you also realize it's happening 99% of the time. It's happening against the player's will. The team has come to him and said, listen, dude, you just don't have it anymore. And there are some big names that went that route that retired, like Jerry Rice retired during preseason. The team just could not find a spot for him, and they didn't want to see him continue to bounce around, so they kind of talk him into retirement. Dave Edwards had injury issues. Mike Bass retiring in July. It's sad when they retire in July, especially ending great careers. You almost wish they had retired back in February or January when the season ended.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. To come to training camp and to think you can still play, your heart tells you can still play, and the other teammates are like, no, you can't do it. That's deflating.
And two pretty well-known instances of the surprise retirement in training camp. Maybe the most shocking retirement of our lifetimes was actually a July training camp retirement, Barry Sanders.
So I also have a personal background with the training camp retirement. My sophomore year of college, second day of practice, we ran the 40s, and let's just say I still haven't finished running mine. That's how slow I was. My head coach at the time, now I played at SUNY Canton Junior College, my head coach at the time happened to be the same head coach the Buffalo Bills had in the mid-70s, Lou Saban. And Coach Saban pulled me aside and he asked me, he goes, Vince, what was your time? Not good, sir. Damn it, I asked you what your time was. What was your time? So I told him it was like 5.4, and he walked away. I was like, I'm getting cut. I know I'm getting cut. At the end
I'm
of the
surprised
practice, at the end of practice, he called me back. Vince, get over here. And that's when he offered me a job as a graduate assistant coach with the team. It allowed me to continue to be with the team and add something because I have knowledge. I just did not have athletic ability anymore. And I was a wide receiver with that squad that played in 3-hole plays my freshman year and became a graduate assistant coach with the defense my sophomore year.
And when Vince asked you about this, did he happen to say, God almighty, Vince, why did you do that?
Now, Lou Saban, I could go on and on about Lou Saban's stories, and some of them were probably just better let him rest in peace. He was a funny man, that's for sure, but some of the stuff that came out of his mouth was, it was an adventure the 3 years that I worked with him, played and worked for him. All right. Moving on to our next topic, don't fight the new laws because the laws are going to win. Every offseason brings changes to the rulebook. The 1976 offseason was no exception. Perhaps the biggest change fans noticed was the addition of the 30-second play clock at the end of each field. So you could see the play clock ticking down. Instead of officials estimating how much time had passed or keeping it on a watch, it's a visible countdown to the snap of the football. The NFL also updated its face mask rule, creating 2 different penalties. Accidentally grabbing a face mask became a 5-yard penalty, while twisting and pulling and popping, and that's a different game, that became a 15-yard personal foul. The league also clarified what would happen if the defense committed a penalty during an extra point attempt, changed the timing of the pregame coin toss, and officially retired the white striped footballs that had been used for night games. Finally, there was one rule out of the player safety, the so-called Davidson rule, prohibiting defenders from launching themselves into a runner who had already slipped or fallen untouched, an effort to eliminate unnecessary violent hits on defenseless players. Some of these changes seem minor in 1976, but several have influenced the way football is still being played today. All right, Chris, looking at this list, which of these rules or these changes do you think had the biggest impact on the game of football, both in 1976 and for the future of the NFL?
The 30-second play clock, because now you actually knew how much time they'd have to snap between, because as you said, the referees used to guesstimate. Like, we did a couple of 1975 rewatches. Like, if you watch, when we did that Chiefs-Cowboys Monday night game, you couldn't tell how many seconds there were. Like, sometimes it'd be 20 or 25 seconds, so there was no official tally. Well, now we have one. And as for the Davidson rule, of course, that, of course, was, holy Toledo, it's a free-for-all.
Yeah, I think about Manny Fernandez launching himself at the end of the Sea of Hands play.
That's a good point right there. I think to me, that seems to be the biggest rule change. Launching yourself into, and not only could you hurt somebody, you could also hurt yourself if you're not careful too. No, there's been another change, as far as I'm concerned, that's as significant as that one.
I agree there. That Davidson rule, as Mark said, if a particular hit happens here, it could be a double whammy. Both sides, both players would get hurt, the perpetrator and the victim, as it were. Now, as far as the face mask penalty, the accidental one, I knew there was a 15-yard penalty for face masking before 76. Case in point, one of the Jet players was caught face masking right around the time NBC switched over to Heidi in the middle of the Raiders' 14 touchdowns, 14-point stretch in less than 10 seconds.
You know, real quick, back to the launching before we move on to the next question. This isn't pro wrestling. Nobody wants to see Stan the Man Stasiak launching himself at Bob Backlund for the WWF Championship. All right, Mark, was there one rule change that surprised you? Maybe something fans took for granted back then that seems unusual when we look back 50 years later?
76. I'm trying to think. This is about the time, I don't know if it's 75 or 76. I think it's after 76. It might be a year away from when you can't launch yourself at a defensive back. Am I right on that one, or am I wrong on this one? Is it 76 or 77 that rule was changed?
It's definitely the rules that help the passing game and the offense. I believe are, if not 76,
It's
no
either
later than
76 or
78. Yeah,
77.
78.
78
was
it's
the big
78. So
one.
76. Okay, so we're still a couple years from that. The rules back then, I'm not as super fond of until you mentioned them. I'm not. That's the one thing I'm not real sure of. I can't give you a definite strong answer like I have on most other topics.
All right, Charles, baseball is famous for debating rule changes, and football isn't much different. Do you think the NFL generally does a good job evolving its rule book, or do you think leagues sometimes overthink changes that don't really need to be made?
Well, in the case of overdoing it, one of the case in baseball was in 1988 when Major League Baseball instituted a balk rule, but the players and pitchers especially balked, no pun intended, at the structure of balk rules. That particular rule was taken away by the end of the 1988 season. Now, as far as the rule going to 76. There's no overreach as far as I'm concerned. The Davidson rule, the 30-second play clock, and the unintentional face mask rules.
All right, folks, we're going to move into a segment. We normally, when we talk about these, it's always about the past and how it happened. And we're looking back from 50 years later. It's easy to do that. But the next topic is predicting the future past. No, this is not an X-Men movie. Let's have some fun with this one. For the next few minutes, I want everyone to forget everything they know. Our panelists, the viewers, about the 1976 season. No hindsight is allowed. It's the beginning of August. Training camps are open. The preseason has just begun, and nobody knows what's about to happen. The Steelers are still the kings of the football world. But can they win a third straight Super Bowl? Will one of the traditional powers finally knock them off? Can one of the league's younger teams surprise everyone? So let's put on our imagination caps and pretend it's still the summer of 76. Who wins the divisions? Who represents the AFC and the NFC in the Super Bowl? Who hoists the Lombardi Trophy? And while we're at it, what do you think? Who do you think will become that breakout star of 1976, and which player or team do you think is headed for a disappointing season? All right, Chris, let's start with you. It's August 1976. Who are your division winners, your conference champion, and who's celebrating after Super Bowl 11?
In the AFC East, with the Buffalo situation and Miami is invincible, I think the Colts are going to win the AFC East again. In the AFC Central, I think it's going to be Pittsburgh again, although I do think Cleveland will give them a run. Houston will give them a run. In the AFC West, the Raiders are going to clinch before Thanksgiving. There's no need to talk about that division. In the NFC East, I think Dallas is going to reclaim their division. They're a year older, a year wiser. In the NFC Central, the Vikings are going to clinch before Halloween. And in the NFC West, the Rams are going to clinch the NFC West before the World Series ends. As for the wild cards, in the AFC, I'm going to say it's going to be Cincinnati and Houston. I think the AFC East gets only one. The AFC Central gets two playoff teams. And in the NFC, I'm going to say your wild card teams will be St. Louis and Detroit. I think Washington's headed for a fall this year.
Chris, the two wild cards didn't come until 78. It's one wild card in 76 and three divisions.
Okay, my wild card in the NFC will be St. Louis, and in the AFC, I think it will be Cincinnati again. And I think in the NFC, it'll be St. Louis.
Any other thoughts on your Super Bowl predictions, Charles and Mark?
Those four potential surprise teams. I think the Niners are going to surprise a lot of people under new coach Marty Clark and Jim Plunkett coming home to roost. And don't just credit the Chargers after they acquired Charlie Joyner to give Dan Fouts some support, you could say, a dynamic duo, as it were.
And they were 2-2.
And the AFC East, one surprise team to keep an eye on is all the players the Patriots got in the draft to complement Steve Grogan. Keep an eye on the Patriots. Maybe not this year, but by 77, the Patriots could surprise a lot of people.
My surprise pick is going to be, I'm going to say the Lions. I mean, they got J.D. Hill. They were still okay last year if that Chief game goes the other way. And Minnesota's not getting any younger, and I think Detroit could be an interesting team in the NFC. My AFC surprise, I think it's going to be San Diego. They were 2-12 last year. They have nowhere to go but up.
Okay, we kind of jumped ahead on the. We're discussing right now. Chris's question was who's winning the Super Bowl. Mark, do you have any thoughts on that one?
My thoughts are it's going to be Pittsburgh coming out of the AFC. They're the team to beat, and I don't see anybody that can beat them right now. In the NFC, I'm thinking it's Dallas. I think the road's going to go through Dallas, and I think you're going to have a rematch again in Super Bowl 10.
All right, let me put on real quick before we get to the next question. Let me put on my Mafia Macho Man hat for a second to give you my prediction. Yeah, of course, the Mafia Macho Man's going to say it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. A three-peat is coming in the NFL this year. The Pittsburgh Steelers will defeat the Minnesota Vikings in a rematch of Super Bowl IX. All right, Mark, what's your breakout player for 76? Is there a young star or maybe a veteran in a new situation that you think is about to have a huge year?
76. I think keep an eye on Joyner in San Diego. I think he's gonna be well, and he's gonna help a young rookie quarterback with Dan Fouts. Dan Fouts and Joyner are gonna hook up a lot, and you're gonna see a lot more offense coming together with those two out there.
My breakout star is going to be who came on strong in the second half of last year, Walter Payton. It's only his second year, and if this O.J. Simpson situation is going to bubble for Buffalo, who's going to basically become the next superstar running back? I think it could be Walter Payton.
We have got running backs. We talked about running backs coming out of college football, coming into the NFL in 76. Of course, there's still a really good running back in college at Pitt that we will definitely be following his push for a Heisman. My thoughts on a potential breakout star, though, is Richard Todd with the New York Jets. And as much as I hate to say the New York Jets could have a breakout season, Joe Namath, we know he can't last a whole season. He's not going to last a whole season. And the second Alabama quarterback that the Jets have taken, Lou Holtz and Richard Todd, will become household names in 76.
I guarantee he'll throw more touchdowns and interceptions. I guarantee it.
All right, so Charles, you brought up your surprise thing that came out of nowhere, or you were talking about the 49ers. Is there anybody else that you think might exceed expectations, and what about disappointments?
Well, besides Jim Plunkin and I know Steve Grogan will be the Patriots' new quarterback, but he's got the full-time gig now, and if he stays healthy, if he has a pretty good season, then that could mean good opportunities for players like Don Calhoun, Andy Johnson, and Sam the Bam Cunningham.
As for disappointments, like who do you think is going to regress?
Well, if O.J. Simpson continues holding out and demanding a trade, he could very well set himself up for disappointment.
I think
whether he stay with Buffalo or the Rams or whatever.
I think Charles has got a point in staying in Buffalo. A big regression could be the man whose jersey I'm actually wearing right now, Joe Ferguson. Without J.D. Hill, without Ahmad Rashad, and with O.J. Simpson causing distraction after distraction, Joe Ferguson has nowhere to go but down in this with the potential of this coming season.
My pick for a regression candidate is Washington. I mean, they're basically older than dirt at this point. If they were old last year, how old are they this year? And signing John Riggins and Dwayne Thomas, I mean, it's like the Redskins basically are signing the 1970 All-Pro team, but it's 1976. The Cardinals are younger. The Cowboys are younger. George Allen and Redskins, I think this is the year the Redskins crash and burn because the future isn't now. The future's dead in D.C.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Chris. That was going to be my regression pick, too. They are an old squad, and it has really showed in that 75 divisional playoff. They just really didn't have anything left from that 72 Super Bowl run. Nothing.
They didn't even make the playoffs in 75. They lost to Dallas in essentially a playoff game before. They missed the playoffs. Okay,
see, that's what I'm saying. Okay, I was even wrong on that. So I thought they made the, but yeah, they looked old, and they're they're I can't see them being any shade of their former selves. They're definitely on the regression scale.
St. Louis passed them, and now it looks like we got a new rivalry in that division.
Before we wrap things up, let's take one last look back at the month in magazines. As you know, if you follow Pigskin Glory on Facebook, every Monday we post the Sports Illustrateds, and this is the July 5th, 1976. And of course, July, the big thing about July wasn't football or even baseball for a change. It was the Summer Olympics. But Charles would be happy to know on July 12th, San Diego's Randy Jones made the cover of Sports Illustrated. On July 19th, back to the Olympics, as we had the U.S. team and their U.S. gold medal hopefuls were on the cover. And then on July 26th, the show in Montreal made the cover. Now, you can see these Sports Illustrateds. You can get them on eBay. That's where I got mine. You can see what football episodes were discussed, and there's still plenty of football for fans to enjoy. It looked back at the rain-shortened college all-star game, following the opening of the NFL training camps. Read features covering everything from league business to preseason storylines. One thing we didn't have in July, though, was a football digest. July was one of the months that Football Digest took off. In August, we will be covering that. Today, the cover featuring Burt Jones of the August Football Digest was posted on Facebook on Football Digest. The NFL's... whether he's the next great quarterback, that's discussed in this issue. So, guys, Sports Illustrated, big in the 70s, obviously. What are your thoughts on the covers of the 76 Sports Illustrateds? Did they make sense for July Olympics and baseball?
Now,
Yes.
the Randy Jones one is fascinating because the Padres, they are nowhere near the pennant race. I mean, compare this to George Brett and Mike Schmidt earlier and the Bird of previous covers.
Yeah, not to mention the Big Red Machine.
Yeah, I think like I said, you asked. I think covering the Olympics, that's once every 4 years. You can cover baseball every year. There's so many games in a baseball season, and you can cover top to bottom from majors to the low level of minors. The Olympics is every 4 years, and it's not in the same spot every 4 years either. It's not just in Greece, or it moves from year to year. So I totally get where Sports Illustrated's coming from on this.
So for every Sunday, because the 1976 calendar is one day ahead of the 2026, so every Sunday you can see later in the day that Sports Illustrated feature. All right, before we turn things over to the panel, let's take a look back at where things stood on the field as July came to a close. The Canadian Football League was already well underway, and though the opening month, the Ottawa Rough Riders sat atop the East Division after a perfect start. Out west, Edmonton had jumped out to an early lead. Although there's still plenty of football to play, south of the border, the NFL regular season is still weeks away, but the preseason kicked off with the All-Star game on the 23rd and the Hall of Fame game on the 24th, Denver's win over Detroit. And expansion clubs July 31st and August 1st took the field. You can see Chris does a wonderful job posting recaps of those games and newspaper articles on the Facebook page, and then on our YouTube channel every night I briefly mention them in the daily recap. The standings may not count yet in the NFL after long off-season. Football is officially back, and now let's hear what our panel has to say about the CFL season and the NFL preseason in July.
The Buccaneers and Seahawks made their debut. I guess you call this the dress rehearsals for the Bucs and Seahawks, and well, one team looked ready for quasi-primetime Seattle. Seahawks had a decent second half against the 49ers. And the Buccaneers, well, they kicked a field goal, and I'm sure John McKay had to approve of their offensive execution. Or the question is he in favor of it, even in July?
All right, well, that wraps up our discussion. But before we go, it's time for everyone's favorite part of the show, our panelists' signature segments. First up, it's Charles Count, where Charles gives us another fascinating number of statistics from the world of baseball. Charles?
Well, of course, Montreal with the side of the Olympic Games. Well, that's where the Montreal Expos will play in next year, Olympic Stadium. But the Expos they're dismal in 72nd to 5-yard Jerry Park there. they're 31 games back of the Phillies in the National League East. As a matter of fact, all 4 division races are runaways. Phils lead 11.5 games. Reds lead 9.5 games over LA. Yankees, playoff battle, it seems for the first time in 12 years, up 10.5 games. And the Royals appear ready to put an end to the A's 5-year run on the AL West, leading by 9 games, 10 up in the loss column. On the batting race, George Brand and Hal McRae are tied for league lead at a 349 clip. And National League, Al Oliver of your Pirates leads the league in batting at 348. The next 3 batters are all Reds: Rose, Griffey, and George Foster. And there was one no-hitter in baseball in the month of July. Larry Durker no-hit the Expos on July the 9th. The National League won the All-Star game 7-1 in Philadelphia, Randy Jones beating the Bird. And one of maybe the lasting stories of that month before the All-Star game, that's when Marvin Miller proposed, and the owners have agreed to this situation, that a ball player could become eligible for free agency after he played 6 years in the major leagues, should he play out his option on the 7th year. Also increases in minimum salary and the pension funds.
All right, that's fascinating. The baseball continue heading toward the conclusion of the 76 season. Now let's take a look down in the bottom right corner of the screen to Mark's memories. Mark takes us back to another moment from the summer of 1976.
Yeah, my memories looking back on 76 are just watching the NFL season rapidly approach. And I'm wanting to pay close attention to, like we were talking about earlier, the teams that are who I believe are going to fall off, and some of these teams that have the potential to come up and running. And that's going to be my memories for summer, as summer's winding down and we are rapidly approaching fall.
All right. Well, we're going to hand it over to Chris for Chris's Corner. You're going to share your thoughts from a fan's perspective. The floor is yours.
1976, I think, to this point, can be summed up as a year of tradition and stability. And I'm not just talking about the bicentennial, because you look at what's going on in the world of sports. Who are your champions? The Pittsburgh Steelers, a recent thing of stability and what they've done in recent years. The Boston Celtics, the Montreal Canadiens, 2 teams rich and deep with their mystique of winning, just adding on to their legacies. Pittsburgh, they're adding to their new legacy of where they've been since their rise from the depths of the end of the 60s to where they are now. And then look at the baseball standings. You've got, the Reds, but you've also got maybe traditions could be changing, because as Charles said, the A's, they seem to be on the ropes in the American League West. The Yankees, another tradition of playing meaningful baseball for the first time in God knows how long. And the Pirates could be on the ropes. So it looks like a lot of tradition has been holding up, but a couple of upstarts in baseball could be saying, hey, maybe it's not going to be the same old, same old. Maybe we're going to get a little new blood, as the A's and the Pirates may be spending in October on the bench.
All right, that'll do it for our July 1976 recap. Beginning in August, we return to our regular 6-month football season format, where we will come at you 3 times a month, cutting the month into thirds every 10 days, which covers the football season with each episode, and following the 1976 season in the CFL, the NFL, college football. It's all coming at you over the next 6 months, 3 episodes a month. We hope you tune in to watch. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Pigskin Glory, football 50 years ago today. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. For Chris, Mark, and Charles, until next time, we'll see you when the Turk calls for your playbook. Good night.